Great. Let's begin with part 1, 1,200 words of your thriller story. I forgot to tell my son that the camera was working again. When I checked it, I froze. Here's the first installment. Right when my wife passed away 3 years ago, the house felt like a cavern. The silence pressed against me, filling every corner, and I began to cling to routines just to stop myself from unraveling. My son Daniel was only 15 at the time, old enough to understand the finality of death, but too young to shoulder the weight of it. Since then, it's just been the two of us, me fumbling through the role of both father and mother, him retreating deeper into himself, into headphones, video games, and the stubborn quiet of a teenager who doesn't know how to grieve out loud. We lived in a modest 2-story home on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Years ago, I'd installed a couple of security cameras after a break-in scare in the neighborhood. They'd been my wife's idea, really. She always worried about safety, about making sure Daniel and I were protected even when she wasn't home. After she died, I stopped paying attention to them. The system went offline at some point. I don't even remember exactly when. For years, the cameras just hung there like useless eyes, staring but blind. A week ago, I decided to fix them. Maybe it was boredom, maybe the creeping anxiety that I wasn't doing enough as a father, but I thought it might be good to have them working again, just in case. The world feels stranger these days, and Daniel was spending more and more time alone. It took me a couple of nights after work, tinkering in the basement, updating firmware, reconnecting wires. Finally, the system hummed back to life. The monitors in my study glowed with real-time feeds again. One camera in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one at the top of the stairs. I never told Daniel. It wasn't intentional, not exactly. I figured I'd bring it up at dinner, but the right moment never came. He'd slump into his chair, earbuds dangling, shovel food into his mouth without looking up, and retreat back to his room before I'd found the words. By the way, the cameras are back online didn't seem like the kind of sentence that would spark conversation anyway, so I let it slide. The first night I watched the feeds out of curiosity, just a father's dull reassurance, seeing my son sprawled on the couch, flipping through his phone or padding into the kitchen for a late-night snack. Ordinary, boring, comforting even. But on the third night, something shifted. It was close to midnight. I was in my study, papers strewn across my desk, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Out of habit, my eyes flicked to the monitor. Daniel's room didn't have a camera, privacy of course, but the upstairs hallway did. I saw him step out of his room barefoot, pajama-clad, moving slowly down the hallway toward the stairs. He paused, like he was listening for something, then descended out of frame. I leaned back, frowning. Odd but not alarming. Maybe he was hungry. But then, a few seconds later, I saw him again, still in the hallway, still stepping out of his room. The exact same motion. At first I thought the feed had glitched, looping the same few seconds. I tapped the screen, checked the timestamp. No glitch, the system was live. And yet Daniel had walked down that hallway twice. My heart thudded once, heavy and deliberate. I clicked over to the living room camera. There he was, already standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring toward the darkened kitchen. His posture was strange, rigid, like his body had been strung up on invisible wires. And upstairs, on the hallway feed, he was still moving. Still coming out of his room. I blinked hard. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe my mind was trying to stitch sense where there wasn't any. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Both images were still there. Daniel downstairs, frozen at the foot of the stairs, and Daniel upstairs, stepping slowly toward the landing. The coffee tasted sour in my mouth. My throat had gone dry. I told myself it was impossible, that I was misreading the shadows, that maybe one of the feeds had a delay or a lag, but the timestamps matched. The system was live. I pushed back from my desk so quickly that my chair toppled over. My footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as I went to the stairs, calling his name. Daniel? No answer. I reached the bottom and looked toward the kitchen. Empty. The living room, too. I jogged up the stairs, 2 at a time, my pulse hammering. Daniel's bedroom door was closed. I knocked once, then pushed it open. He was in bed, asleep. The rise and fall of his chest was steady, the glow of his phone screen casting faint light on his face. He looked peaceful, normal, like any other teenage boy lost in the shallows of a dream. I stood there for a long time, watching him, waiting for something, anything, to explain what I'd seen. A trick of the light, a glitch in the system, but all I heard was his breathing. All I saw was his still body under the blankets. When I went back to the study, the feeds showed nothing unusual, just the empty hallway, the empty living room. The house was still again. I should have turned the cameras off right then. I should have shut the system down and convinced myself that nothing had happened. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something about the unease rooted itself in me deep and insistent. The next night, I watched again, and this time, what I saw made my blood run colder. Perfect. Let's move into part 2, ain't 1,200 words, of your thriller. I forgot to tell my son that the camera was working again. When I checked it, I froze. Here's the continuation. Right the following night, I promised myself I wouldn't obsess. I told myself it was nothing, just a tired brain seeing patterns where there weren't any. Still, when the house settled into silence, when Daniel retreated into his room and the clock on my desk crept toward midnight, I found my eyes drifting to the monitors again. The feeds glowed in the darkened study, the living room washed in faint moonlight, the kitchen draped in shadows. The upstairs hallway lit only by the nightlight I'd plugged in years ago, when Daniel was still afraid of the dark. At first, everything was normal. The stillness was almost soothing, just empty spaces and the familiar creak of the house adjusting in the night. But at 12:17 a.m., the movement started. Daniel's bedroom door creaked open. He stepped into the hallway barefoot again, his face unreadable in the weak glow. He moved slowly, deliberately, his eyes half-lidded, unfocused. Sleepwalking, I thought at once. It had to be. I'd heard of teenagers doing it, though Daniel never had before. That explanation felt like a lifeline, something simple to hold on to. He walked down the hallway, past the stair landing, and descended toward the living room. I clicked to the downstairs feed and saw him emerge into the living room exactly as expected, his body slack, his gaze fixed forward. He moved toward the couch, then stopped, standing there like he'd forgotten why he came. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen, then on the hallway feed. His bedroom door creaked open again. The second Daniel stepped out. Same bare feet, same vacant eyes, same slow walk down the hall. My stomach lurched. 2 nights in a row. Not a glitch, not a trick. This wasn't right. I forced myself to focus on the feeds, flipping between them. In the living room, the first Daniel was still standing by the couch, rigid and silent. In the hallway, the second one was reaching the top of the stairs, moving in that same puppet-like shuffle. His head twitched slightly as though his neck couldn't hold the weight of his skull. My mouth went dry. "Daniel," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me. "What the hell is happening?" The one downstairs finally moved. He tilted his head back toward the ceiling, as if he were staring directly at the upstairs camera. For a long, impossible moment, I thought he was looking at me. I froze, unable to blink. The second Daniel reached the bottom of the stairs. The 2 of them were now in the same frame, one by the couch, one stepping off the last stair. Neither acknowledged the other. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard the wood dug into my palms. I wanted to rush out there, to shake Daniel awake, to demand answers, but something in me hesitated. Some primal instinct told me to stay hidden, to keep watching. The living room version of my son turned toward the kitchen. His movements were jerky, mechanical. The second one followed, their paths never intersecting, as though each existed in its own layer of reality. I switched to the kitchen feed. Both were there now, one by the fridge, the other hovering near the counter. They moved without acknowledgement of the other's presence. both staring blankly at nothing, both eerily silent. I whispered his name again, but the sound felt useless. Then something changed. The one by the fridge slowly lifted his head toward the camera. His lips curled into a smile, a sharp, unsettling thing that didn't belong on my son's face. I'd never seen Daniel smile like that in his life. It was stretched too wide, the corners of his mouth pulled back like he was forcing his skin to obey him. His teeth gleamed in the dim light. The other one by the counter mirrored it. The same unnatural grin spread across his face, identical, synchronized. I stumbled backward, my chair clattering against the floor. The sound echoed through the study, loud enough that I worried Daniel, my real Daniel, would hear. When I dared to look back at the monitors, both figures were gone. The kitchen was empty. The living room, too. I switched frantically between the feeds, scanning every angle, but the house was silent and still. Only the faint hum of the camera system kept me company. I stood there, paralyzed, my breath shallow, my thoughts scrambled. I wanted to run into Daniel's room to make sure he was still there, still asleep, still him, but another part of me dreaded what I might find. What if I opened that door and saw him smiling like that? What if I found two of him waiting inside? I couldn't bear the thought. Instead, I sat back down, hands trembling, and forced myself to keep watching. Hours crawled by. Nothing else happened. By 3 a.m., exhaustion pinned me in place, and I dozed off at the desk. When I woke, the feeds showed only the quiet morning light creeping into the house. Daniel's bedroom door was closed, same as always. I stumbled upstairs, pushed his door open, and found him groggy in bed, rubbing his eyes. "Dad?" he mumbled. "Why are you staring at me?" Relief flooded me so quickly I almost collapsed. He looked normal, just a tired teenager, annoyed that his dad was hovering. "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just making sure you're up for school." He groaned, pulled a pillow over his head, and muttered something about 5 more minutes. I closed the door, leaning against the frame, my heart still thudding. For the rest of the day, I convinced myself it had been some kind of hallucination, sleep deprivation, stress. Maybe the cameras were malfunctioning after all, spitting out strange overlapping images. There had to be an explanation, but deep down, I knew better. That night I promised myself I wouldn't check the feeds. I powered down the monitors, shoved the chair under the desk, and sat in the living room with a book instead. Daniel went to bed early, and the house settled into its usual silence. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page. Every creak of the house made my head snap up. Every shadow seemed to move. My nerves were strung tight, ready to snap. At 12:15, I gave in. I crept back into the study and switched the monitors on. The feeds blinked to life. The house looked calm, empty. Then in the hallway, Daniel's bedroom door opened again. This time, though, what stepped out wasn't my son. Not exactly. It had his face, his frame, his clothes, but the eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep. They looked straight into the camera, straight into me, and for the first time, I realized whatever I was watching wasn't just Daniel sleepwalking. It was something else wearing his skin, and it knew I was watching. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark, bottomless pits where my son's eyes should have been. They weren't just shadows, I knew that much. They weren't tricks of a glitching camera. They stared back at me, aware, calculating, hungry. By dawn, my head was heavy, my chest tight, but I forced myself to go through the motions of a normal day. I fried eggs and bacon, poured coffee, waited for Daniel to stumble into the kitchen. When he finally came down, rubbing his eyes and yawning, he looked perfectly normal. His hair was a mess, his expression bleary, his voice still thick with sleep as he mumbled, "Morning." I studied him. Every detail, the curve of his nose, the freckles on his cheek, the way he scratched the back of his neck while waiting for the toast to pop. Nothing looked off. His eyes were just his eyes, brown, tired, familiar, but I couldn't shake the memory of that thing looking at me through the feed. "Dad?" Daniel asked, frowning at me. "Why are you staring at me like that?" I blinked, forcing a smile. "Sorry, just tired." He shrugged, grabbed his plate, and disappeared into the living room to eat in front of the TV. Typical morning. Almost comforting, but deep down, I felt it. Something was wrong. That evening, I tried to distract myself with chores. Laundry, dishes, bills, anything but the cameras. But no matter how I filled my time, I could feel their presence in the house. The unblinking eyes waiting in my study, recording, watching. By midnight, I couldn't resist. I told myself I just needed reassurance. Just a quick glance. When I powered up the system, the feeds glowed to life, bathing the study in their pale light. The living room was empty. The kitchen, too. The hallway stood quiet. Daniel's door shut tight. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. I started to think maybe it was over. Maybe it had been a nightmare after all. Then the hallway door opened. Daniel stepped out, his movements slow and deliberate, just like before. He didn't look at the camera this time. He just shuffled forward down the hall, down the stairs. I clicked over to the living room feed. He came into frame, expression blank, gaze fixed forward. My pulse hammered. Then the hallway door opened again. Another Daniel stepped out, and another. My skin crawled, one after another. Identical copies of my son emerged from that room. Their feet patted softly against the carpet, their bodies moving in that same unnatural rhythm. Their faces slack and empty. 4, 5, 6 of them. The first one reached the couch and sat down, folding his hands neatly in his lap. The second leaned against the wall. The third stood in the middle of the room, swaying slightly like a broken marionette. The rest crowded in behind, filling the space, all silent, all watching nothing. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run upstairs and tear that door open, but terror rooted me in place. Then as one, their heads turned toward the camera, toward me. A sickening wave of nausea rolled through me. Their expressions changed, slowly, deliberately. Each face twisted into that grotesque smile, wide and sharp and impossibly wrong. I stumbled back, my chair crashing to the floor. On the monitors, the copies began to move again. They rose from the couch, pushed away from the wall, and shuffled toward the edge of the frame. As if leaving the living room, I clicked to the kitchen feed. There they were, filing in, crowding the small space. Their movements grew faster, twitchier, like static crawling under their skin. Some slammed their hands against the counters. Others pressed their faces up close to the lens. Those black eyes filling the frame. I slapped the power button, plunging the study into darkness. The silence roared in my ears. I sat there trembling, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I had to see for myself. He was there, curled under the blankets, asleep. Just a boy. Just my son. I lowered the bat, relief washing over me so hard my knees nearly buckled. I whispered his name, but he didn't stir. His breathing was steady, calm. I backed out quietly, pulling the door shut behind me. When I returned to the study, I hesitated before touching the monitor. I didn't want to see it again, but I had to know. I powered the system back on. The feeds blinked to life. Empty living room, empty kitchen, empty hallway. For a moment, I almost believed it was over. Then in the corner of the hallway feed, I saw movement. Not Daniel. Not exactly. A shape, crouched low, peering out from behind his bedroom door. Its face was almost his, but not quite. Cheeks stretched too thin, smile too wide, eyes too deep. It tilted its head in a jerky, inhuman angle, staring straight at the lens, straight at me. I couldn't breathe. Then, slowly it raised a hand and waved. I slammed the monitors off again, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. This thing, whatever it was, knew I was watching. It was playing with me and Daniel, my real son. He was still asleep upstairs, unaware of the thing that wore his face. I sat there until dawn, paralyzed, staring at the dark screens, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. The cameras weren't just showing me my son, they were showing me something else, and it wanted me to keep watching. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a baseball bat from the hall closet, and crept up the stairs. My legs felt like lead, every step a battle. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge downstairs. At Daniel's door, I paused. My knuckles hovered over the wood, my heart battering against my ribs. I pushed it open. I couldn't face the cameras for 2 nights. I told myself it was for my sanity, that if I ignored them, the nightmare would end, that what I saw was just a trick of exhaustion and paranoia. But I knew I was lying to myself. The truth lurked in the corners of the house, in every shadow, in every creak of the floorboards at night. I couldn't stop glancing at Daniel either. During breakfast, I searched his face for flaws, for seams, for some sign that the thing I'd seen was him and not him. But all I found was my teenage son, cranky, distracted, shoveling cereal into his mouth while scrolling through his phone. Yet sometimes, only for an instant, his expression flickered. A twitch at the corner of his mouth, a shadow in his eyes, small things that could have been nothing, but they left my stomach in knots. I couldn't tell him. How could I? Son, I think something wearing your skin is parading around our house at night. He'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but by the 3rd night, curiosity overpowered fear. When the house fell quiet and Daniel went to bed, I found myself back in the study, staring at the dark monitors. My hand hovered over the power button. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I told myself I'd walk away. Then I pressed it. The feeds flared to life, bathing the room in pale light. The house was still, empty, silent. Minutes passed. My heart pounded with every tick of the clock. At 12:19, the hallway door opened. Daniel stepped out. My stomach dropped. He walked the same puppet-like gait as before. Down the hall, down the stairs, into the living room. Then the door opened again. Another Daniel, and another, and another. They poured out of that room like water spilling over the rim of a glass, each identical to the last, each moving with that uncanny stiffness. 4, 6, 10 of them, crowding the hallway, filling the living room. I couldn't breathe. Some sat on the couch. Some stood swaying slightly. Some pressed their faces towards the camera, black eyes staring into the lens. My chest tightened, bile rising in my throat. Then all at once, they froze. Their heads snapped upward, every face turning in perfect unison. Eyes locked on me through the monitors. I stumbled back, and then, impossibly, I heard it, a sound that didn't come from the speakers but from the house itself. From the walls, from the air, a low whispering chorus, "Dad!" My blood turned to ice. I spun around, scanning the study, the hallway, the stairs. Nothing. Just that whisper curling through the silence. Dozens of voices layered together, all of them using my son's voice. "Dad! Come watch." The words slithered under my skin, into my bones. I wanted to run, to smash the monitors, to drag Daniel out of this house and never return, but I couldn't move. The sound rooted me in place, a predator's gaze pinning prey. On the monitors, the copies began to move again. They stood one by one, grinning those stretched, grotesque grins. Their mouths opened wider, wider until their jaws unhinged, black voids yawning where throats should be. From those mouths, the whispers poured. "Watch, watch, watch." I slammed my fists on the desk. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Leave him alone." The whispers fell silent. Every copy froze, and then one by one, they lifted their hands, pointing at me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I staggered backward, knocking over books, papers scattering across the floor. The study felt smaller, suffocating, as if the house itself was folding in on me. Then, something even worse happened. From upstairs, a door creaked open. Daniel's door, the real one. My stomach lurched. I bolted from the study, baseball bat in hand, racing up the stairs 2 at a time. "Daniel!" I shouted, panic tearing through my throat. The hallway was dark, the nightlight casting its sickly glow. His bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open, breath ragged. He wasn't in bed. The blankets were rumpled, the pillows still warm, but the bed was empty, No, I whispered, heart hammering. No, no, no. A sound came from behind me. A shuffle. I spun. Daniel stood at the end of the hall. At least it looked like him. But his posture was all wrong. Head tilted too far, shoulders stiff, hands dangling loosely at his sides. His face was hidden in shadow. Daniel. My voice cracked. He didn't answer. He just stared. Then, slowly he began to smile. That same impossible grin. Too wide, too sharp. The bat slipped from my hands, clattering to the floor. And in the silence that followed, I heard it again, that whisper, curling through the house like smoke. Watch. The lights flickered. The hallway warped. For a moment, it felt like the walls themselves were bending, stretching toward me. I stumbled back into Daniel's room, slamming the door shut, pressing my weight against it. My heart raced, my palms slick with sweat. The whispers rose again, louder now, surrounding me, pressing in from every angle. Watch! 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 I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up. But this was no dream. I looked around the room, desperate. His phone lay on the nightstand, the screen still glowing faintly. I snatched it up, thumb trembling as I tapped the camera app. I pointed it at the door. For a moment, nothing. Just the wood of the door, my shadow trembling in the glow of the screen. Then slowly, a shape began to bleed through. Dozens of hands pressing against the other side. Dozens of faces. Dozens of wide black eyes. All of them my son. All of them smiling. The phone slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the whispers drilled through anyway. Watch, watch, watch! The door rattled. The knob twisted, screamed. This will be the climactic finale, blending horror and psychological unraveling, ending with a twist that leaves doubt about whether the father's perception is real or corrupted by the cameras. Here's the conclusion. Right. The door shook under their weight. The knob twisted back and forth, rattling, straining, as though dozens of unseen hands were trying to wrench it open. I pressed my shoulder hard against the wood, my chest heaving, the whispers drilling into my skull. Watch, watch, watch! It felt like the house itself was vibrating with that word. My teeth rattled, my vision blurred. My knees buckled, but I held the door with everything I had left. Then, suddenly, silence. The rattling stopped. The whispers cut out. The air hung heavy and still. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My heart thundered in my ears, filling the void the voices had left. Slowly, painfully, I leaned away from the door. Nothing. Just silence. I lowered myself to the floor, trembling, sweat dripping down my face. My hands were raw from gripping the doorframe so hard. For what felt like hours, I just sat there in the dark, waiting for something to happen. But nothing came. When the first slivers of dawn crept through the curtains, I dared to open the door. The hallway was empty. The air was heavy with the stale scent of night. But everything looked normal, the nightlight still glowing faintly, the carpet undisturbed. I stumbled downstairs like a drunk, gripping the railing for balance. My body felt hollow, my mind raw. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water. Though my hands shook so badly, half of it spilled onto the counter. That's when I heard footsteps. I froze. Slow, steady footsteps coming down the stairs. I turned, heart clawing at my throat. It was Daniel, or at least it looked like him. His hair was messy, his eyes bleary, his hoodie rumpled. He yawned, scratching the back of his head, and mumbled, "Morning." My knees nearly gave out. I wanted to collapse into him, to hug him, to beg him to tell me he was real. But doubt gnawed at me. "Morning," I managed, my voice shaking. He frowned. "Dad, are you okay?" "You look like crap." I forced a laugh that cracked halfway out. "Did you hear anything last night?" He squinted at me, confused. "Like what?" "Voices, noises, anything strange?" He shook his head. "I was asleep." "You're freaking me out." He padded into the kitchen, poured himself cereal, and sat at the table. Everything about him seemed ordinary, so painfully ordinary, and yet I couldn't shake the image of those black eyes, that impossible grin, That day crawled by. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. I hovered around Daniel like a shadow, watching his every move. He played video games, did homework, texted friends. All so normal. Too normal. But normalcy didn't erase the memory of what I'd seen. By evening, my paranoia was boiling over. Every time he left the room, I checked the cameras. I told myself it was for protection, to keep him safe. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was addicted. The cameras weren't just showing me my son. They were showing me the cracks, the truth hiding underneath, and I couldn't stop looking. That night, I swore I wouldn't turn the monitors on. I locked the study door, shoved the key into my pocket, and sat in the living room with Daniel while he scrolled on his phone. But when he went to bed, the house fell into silence, and the silence was unbearable. By midnight, I was pacing. My skin itched, my nerves screamed. I pulled the key out, telling myself I just needed one glance. Just one, in the study. The monitors glowed as I powered them on. The feeds were quiet. Then at 12:14, Daniel's door opened. He stepped into the hallway. My chest tightened. I flipped to the living room feed. He came down the stairs. Then another stepped out, and another. The copies spilled out. Their faces slack, their eyes black voids. They crowded the hallway, the living room, the kitchen. Their whispers rose again, soft at first, then swelling like a storm. Watch, watch, watch. I wanted to turn the monitors off. I wanted to smash the system to pieces, but I couldn't move. One by one, the copies turned toward the camera, then slowly toward me. Their mouths stretched into those impossible grins, and in unison, they spoke. Which one is real? My breath caught. I stumbled back, shaking my head. No, you can't. The feed flickered. For a moment, I saw Daniel's room, my real son, lying asleep, peaceful, unaware. Then the feed flickered again. His face changed. The smile spread. The eyes darkened. Which one is real, Dad? The whispers chorused. I screamed, slamming the power button. Darkness swallowed the room, but the whisper didn't stop. It was in the walls. It was in my head. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, sunlight streamed through the curtains. Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, chewing cereal. Dad? He asked, frowning. You okay? You were screaming last night. My throat was dry. My body ached. Daniel, I whispered. Are you real? He blinked. What? Are you real? I asked again, louder this time. He stared at me like I was insane. Of course I'm real. What are you talking about? But I saw it, just for a flicker, just for an instant. The corner of his mouth twitching upward, the shadow deep in his eyes, and I realized the truth. The cameras hadn't shown me lies. They'd shown me what he really was, or what he was becoming. Now every time I look at him, I wonder, is he my son? Or just another copy, wearing his skin, waiting for me to keep watching? I don't know anymore. All I know is this: the cameras are still on and I can't look away.